What if I told you that your success or failure in life has almost nothing to do with your circumstances, and almost everything to do with the way you think about those circumstances? You can grab your own copy of this life-changing book through the link in the video description below. Have you ever wondered why two people with nearly identical backgrounds, education, and opportunities can experience dramatically different levels of success? Why one person thrives despite overwhelming obstacles while another falters with every advantage? The answer, according to Jeff Keller in his transformative book, Attitude is Everything, lies not in external circumstances, but in the powerful force that shapes every aspect of our lives: our attitude. Keller's journey to this profound insight began with his own transformation. As a dissatisfied attorney trapped in a cycle of negative thinking, he discovered that by shifting his attitude, he could completely reshape his professional and personal life. This realization led him to leave his legal career and establish his own motivational speaking company, Attitude is Everything, Inc., where he has spent decades helping individuals and organizations harness the remarkable power of positive attitude. What makes this book particularly compelling is its straightforward, no-nonsense approach. Unlike many personal development books that rely on complex theories or systems, Keller focuses on practical principles that anyone can implement immediately. He presents his ideas through a simple three-part framework: think, speak, and act, that systematically addresses how attitudes form and how they can be transformed. Another refreshing aspect of Keller's approach is his emphasis on gradual, consistent change rather than overnight transformation. He acknowledges that shifting deeply ingrained thought patterns takes time and persistence, offering readers a realistic roadmap for sustainable personal growth rather than promising instant results. Throughout the book, Keller supports his principles with vivid real-world examples, memorable anecdotes, and actionable exercises that bring abstract concepts into practical focus. This blend of inspiration and application makes the book not just intellectually stimulating but immediately useful in daily life. Let's explore the key insights from this powerful book that has changed countless lives around the world. Part 1. How your attitude shapes your future. At the foundation of Keller's philosophy is the recognition that our attitudes fundamentally determine the direction and quality of our lives. He defines attitude as the way you look at things mentally, and argues that this mental viewpoint creates the lens through which we interpret and respond to everything we experience. Keller begins by addressing what he calls the 10-90 rule, inspired by psychologist William James. This principle suggests that we can't control 10% of what happens to us: the unexpected challenges, obstacles, and circumstances that life inevitably presents. However, we have complete control over the remaining 90%, how we respond to those circumstances. This response, determined entirely by our attitude, ultimately shapes the outcomes we experience. To illustrate this principle, Keller shares the story of two shoe salespeople sent to a remote village. The first salesperson sees that no one wears shoes and dejectedly reports back, "No opportunity here, nobody wears shoes." The second observes the same situation but enthusiastically declares, "Incredible opportunity, nobody wears shoes yet." Same circumstance, completely different perception, and therefore entirely different potential outcomes. This simple parable reveals how our mental viewpoint, our attitude, functions as either a powerful asset or a severe liability. Positive attitudes expand possibilities, energize action, and attract support from others. Negative attitudes, conversely, blind us to opportunities, drain our motivation, and repel potential allies. The external world, in essence, responds to and reflects our internal environment. Keller emphasizes that attitudes aren't innate or fixed traits, but learned responses that become habitual through repetition. This insight offers both challenge and hope. If our attitudes result from accumulated thoughts and beliefs rather than unchangeable personality, We have the power to transform them through conscious effort and consistent practice. The book explains that we develop our attitudes through various influences: family upbringing, peer groups, media consumption, and significant life experiences. These external voices eventually become internalized as our own self-talk, the ongoing conversation we have with ourselves about our capabilities, opportunities, and limitations. This internal dialogue, whether positive or negative, becomes the foundation for our attitudes and subsequently our actions and results. Keller introduces the crucial concept of the self-fulfilling prophecy, the psychological principle that our expectations powerfully influence outcomes. When we believe something will happen, we unconsciously behave in ways that increase the likelihood of that expectation being realized. This creates a circular pattern. Our attitudes shape our expectations, which influence our behaviors, which produce results that confirm our original attitudes. This cycle works in both positive and negative directions. If you believe you'll excel at a presentation, you'll prepare thoroughly, practice confidently, and deliver with enthusiasm, behaviors that significantly increase your chances of success. Conversely, if you expect to fail, you'll likely procrastinate, prepare inadequately, and present nervously, virtually ensuring a disappointing outcome that reinforces your initial negative belief. The implications of this principle are profound. By consciously choosing and cultivating positive attitudes, we set in motion powerful psychological forces that help manifest the very outcomes we desire. This isn't magical thinking, but a practical application of how human psychology functions. Our brains are constantly filtering the infinite data around us, and our attitudes determine which information we notice, remember, and act upon. Keller acknowledges that developing a positive attitude doesn't mean ignoring problems or adopting blind optimism. Rather, it means approaching challenges with the belief that solutions exist and that you have, or can develop, the capacity to implement them. This solution-focused mindset energizes problem-solving efforts while pessimism paralyses them. He offers several practical strategies for beginning the attitude transformation process. First, become aware of your current attitudes by monitoring your thoughts, especially during challenges. Notice whether you immediately focus on problems or potential solutions, limitations or possibilities. This awareness, while sometimes uncomfortable, provides the essential starting point for change. Second, recognize that you have the power to choose your attitude regardless of circumstances. This choice may not feel natural or easy initially, but with practice, conscious attitude selection becomes increasingly automatic. Keller suggests beginning each day with a deliberate decision about the attitude you'll maintain. Third, surround yourself with positive influences, books, podcasts, and especially people who demonstrate the attitudes you wish to develop. We naturally absorb the dominant attitudes in our environment, so creating an uplifting atmosphere accelerates personal transformation. Fourth, practice gratitude as an attitude catalyst. By regularly identifying and appreciating positive aspects of your life, you train your mind to notice opportunities rather than obstacles, a foundational shift that supports all other attitude adjustments. Finally, Keller recommends visualization as a powerful tool for attitude development. By creating vivid mental images of yourself, demonstrating positive attitudes, and achieving desired outcomes, you essentially rehearse success mentally before experiencing it physically. This practice bridges the gap between intellectual understanding and emotional embodiment of new attitudes. Keller concludes this section by addressing a common misconception: that attitude transformation requires extraordinary willpower or relentless positive thinking. Instead, he emphasizes that lasting change comes through consistent small choices made daily, minor adjustments in perspective that compound over time into significant transformation. This accessible approach makes attitude improvement available to anyone willing to begin the process, regardless of their starting point. Part 2. Watch your words. Creating a new verbal output. In the second part of his book, Keller explores how our language both reflects and reinforces our attitudes. The words we speak not only communicate our thoughts to others, but also program our own subconscious minds, which take our verbal expressions as instructions for creating our reality. Keller begins this section with a powerful insight. Your words are a reflection of your thoughts, and your thoughts are a reflection of your attitudes. This connection between attitude, thought, and speech creates a feedback loop that can either elevate or undermine our effectiveness. When we express negative thoughts verbally, we strengthen their hold on our minds. Conversely, articulating positive possibilities reinforces constructive attitudes. The book identifies several common verbal patterns that signal and perpetuate negative attitudes. The first is complaining, the habitual expression of dissatisfaction without taking constructive action. While occasional venting serves a psychological purpose, chronic complaining trains the brain to notice problems while overlooking solutions and opportunities. Keller offers a three-step process for breaking the complaint habit. First, become aware of how frequently you complain, perhaps by keeping a complaint log for several days. Second, implement the 24-hour rule, waiting a full day before expressing any complaint, which often reveals its insignificance. Third, replace complaints with either constructive suggestions or expressions of gratitude, redirecting negative energy toward productive channels. Another destructive verbal pattern is criticism, the tendency to find fault with others, situations, or oneself. Like complaining, criticism focuses attention on deficiencies rather than possibilities. Keller distinguishes between constructive feedback, which aims to improve situations with specific, supportive suggestions, and criticism, which merely expresses dissatisfaction or assigns blame. The antidote to criticism is deliberately looking for and verbally acknowledging positive qualities in others and situations. This practice not only improves relationships, but also trains your mind to notice opportunities for appreciation rather than disapproval, a fundamental attitude shift with far-reaching benefits. Perhaps the most damaging verbal habit is negative self-talk, the internal dialogue that undermines confidence and limits perceived capabilities. Phrases like, "I can't," "it's too difficult," or "I always mess this up" program the subconscious for failure and become self-fulfilling prophecies. These statements often emerge automatically, especially under stress, having been absorbed from critical parents, teachers, or peers during formative years. Keller provides a systematic approach to transforming negative self-talk. First, recognize negative statements when they occur, perhaps by writing them down to create objective awareness. Pay particular attention to absolute terms like always, never, everyone, or no one, which rarely reflect reality accurately. Second, challenge these statements with rational questions. Is this actually true? What evidence contradicts this belief? What would happen if I assumed the opposite? This analytical process often reveals the exaggerated nature of negative self-assessments. Third, create specific positive alternatives to replace harmful statements. Rather than generic affirmations, develop personalized, believable assertions that directly counter your particular negative patterns. For example, replace "I always freeze during presentations" with "I'm developing my presentation skills with each opportunity." Fourth, consistently verbalize these new statements, both internally and aloud when appropriate. Repetition is essential for reprogramming deeply ingrained thought patterns. Keller suggests using trigger moments, like stopping at red lights or waiting in lines, as reminders to practice positive self-talk. The book also addresses the destructive habit of gossiping, speaking negatively about absent others. Beyond its ethical implications, gossip reinforces a critical mindset that eventually extends to self-judgment. Additionally, it damages trust and creates an atmosphere of negativity that undermines collaborative success. Keller suggests a straightforward remedy: simply refuse to participate in or initiate gossip. When conversations turn toward denigrating others, either change the subject, highlight positive qualities of the person being discussed, or politely excuse yourself. This boundary not only elevates the conversational environment, but also preserves your own positive mindset. Another verbal pattern with profound attitudinal impact is excuse-making, creating explanations that shift responsibility away from oneself. While occasionally legitimate, habitual excuse-making establishes a victim mentality that undermines personal agency. When we verbalize reasons why we can't achieve goals or overcome obstacles, we program our minds to accept limitation rather than seek solutions. The antidote begins with adopting personal responsibility language. I choose rather than I have to. I will find a way instead of it's not possible. I'm learning from this versus this is overwhelming me. This linguistic shift reflects and reinforces an attitude of empowerment rather than helplessness. Keller particularly emphasizes the power of questions in shaping attitudes and outcomes. The questions we ask, both verbally and mentally, direct our focus and energy. Problem-focused questions like, "Why does this always happen to me?" or "Who's to blame?" generate very different responses than solution-oriented inquiries such as, "What can I learn from this?" or "What options haven't I considered yet?" By consciously formulating constructive questions, especially during challenges, we guide our minds toward resourceful states rather than victimhood. Keller suggests developing a personal set of empowering questions to use during difficult situations, such as, "How can I use this experience to grow stronger?" or "What opportunity might be hidden in this problem?" The book also addresses the impact of humor on attitude. While healthy humor provides perspective and relieves tension, sarcastic or cynical comments often disguise genuine complaints or criticisms. Keller encourages readers to notice their humor patterns and consider whether their jokes reinforce positive or negative attitudes toward themselves, others, and life circumstances. Throughout this section, Keller emphasizes that changing verbal habits requires patience and persistence. Patterns established over decades won't transform overnight. The process involves becoming increasingly aware of destructive language, interrupting negative patterns before they gain momentum, and consistently practicing positive alternatives until they become your new default expression. He suggests starting with one specific verbal area rather than attempting comprehensive change immediately. For instance, you might focus first on eliminating complaint language, then address negative self-talk, and gradually expand to other communication patterns. This sequential approach prevents overwhelm while creating sustainable progress. Keller concludes this section by highlighting how verbal transformation influences not only personal attitude, but also the broader social environment. When you change your language patterns, you affect everyone around you, potentially inspiring others to adopt more positive expression. This ripple effect multiplies the impact of individual change, creating supportive communities that further reinforce constructive attitudes. Part 3. Take action, translating attitude into results. In the third and final section of the book, Keller addresses the crucial principle that positive attitudes and words must ultimately translate into constructive action to produce meaningful results. While thoughts and words establish the essential foundation, only implementation creates tangible change in the external world. Keller begins by addressing what he calls the comfort zone trap, the natural human tendency to remain within familiar patterns even when they limit growth and achievement. Our brains are wired to prefer certainty over uncertainty, leading most people to choose comfortable mediocrity over challenging excellence. Breaking through this resistance requires a deliberate attitude of growth and a willingness to experience temporary discomfort for long-term gain. The book outlines a systematic approach to expanding beyond self-imposed limitations. First, recognize that discomfort is not danger. The anxiety that accompanies new challenges signals growth opportunity rather than genuine threat. By reframing nervous feelings as excitement and anticipation rather than fear, you transform potential paralysis into motivating energy. Second, take incremental steps rather than attempting dramatic leaps. By gradually expanding your comfort boundaries, you build confidence through successive achievements while minimizing overwhelming anxiety. Each small success creates momentum for the next challenge. Third, celebrate progress rather than fixating on the distance remaining. Acknowledging your growth, however modest, reinforces the positive attitude necessary for continued advancement. This appreciation mindset counteracts the discouragement that often derails growth initiatives. Fourth, find models and mentors who have successfully navigated similar territory. Learning from others' experiences provides both practical strategies and emotional reassurance that your goals are achievable. Their examples make the unfamiliar feel increasingly accessible. Keller emphasizes that comfort zone expansion eventually becomes self-reinforcing. As you experience the benefits of growth, increased confidence, new capabilities, unexpected opportunities, the process becomes increasingly attractive. What initially felt frightening gradually transforms into exciting challenge. The book next addresses the crucial relationship between attitude and persistence, the capacity to maintain effort despite obstacles and setbacks. Keller argues that perseverance doesn't primarily stem from willpower, but from maintaining a positive attitude toward challenges. When we view obstacles as valuable learning experiences rather than discouraging barriers, we naturally sustain effort through difficulty. He introduces the concept of failure as feedback, reframing unsuccessful attempts not as personal deficiencies, but as informational input for improved approaches. This perspective shift transforms potential stopping points into stepping stones, maintaining forward momentum where others abandon their pursuits. Keller illustrates this principle with numerous examples of renowned achievers, from Thomas Edison to Walt Disney, who experienced multiple failures before breakthrough success. Their distinguishing quality wasn't superior talent but resilient attitude that interpreted setbacks as valuable data rather than definitive judgments. The book provides specific strategies for developing persistence through attitude management. First, clarify your underlying motivation, the compelling why behind your goals. When pursuing objectives aligned with core values and genuine passion, persistence emerges naturally rather than requiring constant self-discipline. Second, anticipate obstacles in advance, developing contingency plans for likely challenges. This proactive mindset prevents discouragement when inevitable difficulties arise, as they've already been incorporated into your expectations and strategies. Third, focus on progress rather than perfection. By celebrating incremental improvements rather than measuring yourself against idealized standards, you maintain the positive emotional state necessary for sustained effort. Fourth, develop supportive routines that maintain momentum even during motivational fluctuations. By establishing consistent patterns for your most important activities, you reduce dependence on variable feelings and create reliability through structure. Keller next explores how attitude influences our approach to problem-solving and decision-making. He distinguishes between the possibility thinker, who approaches challenges with creative curiosity, and the impossibility thinker, who immediately identifies limitations and barriers. This attitudinal difference dramatically affects not just emotional experience but practical outcomes. The book outlines several attitudes that enhance problem-solving effectiveness. Curiosity, approaching situations with questions rather than assumptions, which opens numerous solution pathways that predetermined thinking would miss entirely. Resourcefulness, focusing on available assets rather than absent resources, which reveals creative possibilities within existing circumstances. Responsibility, taking ownership of challenges rather than blaming external factors, which maintains problem-solving energy rather than diverting it toward justification or complaint. Flexibility, willingly adapting approaches when initial methods prove ineffective, which prevents the rigid thinking that perpetuates unnecessary struggles. Collaboration, seeking diverse perspectives rather than insisting on independent resolution, which multiplies available insights and resources. Keller emphasizes that these problem-solving attitudes can be deliberately cultivated through conscious practice, rather than requiring innate personality traits. By consistently approaching challenges with these perspectives, you gradually transform your default response patterns. The book also addresses the critical relationship between attitude and relationships. Keller observes that our attitudes fundamentally determine the quality of our connections with others, influencing everything from first impressions to long-term collaborations. People naturally gravitate toward those who demonstrate positivity, enthusiasm, and appreciation, while avoiding chronically negative or critical individuals. He offers practical guidance for developing relationship-enhancing attitudes. Express genuine appreciation regularly, focusing on specific qualities or actions rather than generic compliments. This practice not only strengthens connections, but trains your mind to notice positive attributes in others. Demonstrate active interest in others' perspectives and experiences through attentive listening and thoughtful questions. This curiosity attitude creates deeper understanding and communicates authentic valuing of the relationship. Maintain a supportive orientation, celebrating others' successes without competitive comparison. This generous attitude creates an environment where mutual achievement flourishes rather than triggering insecurity or resentment. Practice forgiveness rather than harboring grudges, recognizing that resentment primarily damages the person holding it rather than its target. This releasing attitude preserves emotional energy for constructive purposes rather than exhausting it through grievance maintenance. Keller notes that relationship attitudes function reciprocally. The perspectives we demonstrate tend to be reflected back to us. When we approach others with appreciation, interest, support, and forgiveness, these qualities generally return to us multiplied. Conversely, suspicion, criticism, competitiveness, and resentment typically elicit similar responses, creating downward spirals of mutual negativity. The book next explores how attitude affects physical health and energy, essential resources for sustained achievement. Keller cites extensive research demonstrating that positive attitudes correlate with stronger immune function, faster recovery from illness and injury, lower stress hormones, and greater overall vitality. He suggests several practices for cultivating health-enhancing attitudes. Focus on wellness rather than illness by regularly acknowledging and appreciating your body's functioning, rather than exclusively attending to problems or limitations. Maintain reasonable optimism about health outcomes, recognizing that excessive pessimism can actually suppress immune function through stress hormone elevation. Develop stress management attitudes such as perspective, distinguishing genuine emergencies from minor annoyances. Humor, finding appropriate lightness during difficult situations. And acceptance, distinguishing between changeable and unchangeable circumstances. Cultivate enjoyment of healthy activities rather than viewing them as burdensome obligations. This pleasure orientation creates sustainable motivation for beneficial behaviors where discipline alone typically fails. Keller emphasizes that health-promoting attitudes don't replace appropriate medical care, but complement it by creating internal conditions conducive to healing and vitality. The mind-body connection works in both directions, with each system influencing the other's functioning. The book also addresses how attitude affects learning and growth, our capacity to develop new capabilities in response to changing demands. Keller contrasts the fixed mindset, believing abilities are largely innate and unchangeable, with the growth mindset, viewing capabilities as developable through dedicated effort. This fundamental attitude difference profoundly influences how we approach challenges, respond to setbacks, and ultimately determine our achievement ceiling. He offers specific strategies for cultivating a growth-oriented attitude. View challenges as growth opportunities rather than performance evaluations, focusing on development rather than judgment during difficult situations. Interpret struggle as necessary for advancement rather than evidence of inadequacy, recognizing that genuine learning requires working at the edge of current capability. Value effort over innate talent, acknowledging that dedicated practice eventually outperforms untrained natural ability in virtually every domain. Seek constructive feedback rather than defensive self-protection, recognizing that external perspective accelerates improvement beyond what self-assessment alone can provide. Keller emphasizes that learning attitudes function as self-fulfilling prophecies. When we believe our capabilities can expand through dedicated effort, we naturally invest the energy necessary for growth. Conversely, when we view abilities as fixed, we tend to avoid challenges that might reveal limitations, inadvertently preventing the development we could otherwise achieve. The book concludes by addressing what Keller calls attitude maintenance, the ongoing practices necessary to sustain positive perspectives through changing circumstances. He acknowledges that attitude isn't a once-and-done achievement, but requires consistent attention and renewal, particularly during challenging periods. He suggests several specific maintenance strategies. Create a personalized vision statement that captures your ideal attitudes and outcomes in vivid detail. Review this document regularly to maintain clear direction during confusing or difficult situations. Develop a positive environment through selective exposure to media, relationships, and physical spaces that reinforce constructive attitudes rather than undermining them. Establish attitude rituals, regular practices that systematically reinforce positive perspectives, such as morning gratitude reflection, inspirational reading, or encouraging conversations with supportive individuals. Schedule regular attitude assessments to identify when negative patterns begin emerging, addressing small shifts before they develop into entrenched habits. These reviews might occur weekly, focusing on specific attitude aspects like self-talk, problem-solving approaches, or relationship patterns. Practice attitude first aid, specific techniques for quickly shifting perspective during attitude emergencies, when negativity threatens to overwhelm positive orientation. These might include physical movement, perspective-shifting questions, brief meditation, or conversations with mentors. Keller emphasizes that attitude maintenance becomes progressively easier through consistent practice. What initially requires conscious effort gradually becomes habitual, creating a self-sustaining positive orientation that requires only occasional adjustment rather than constant vigilance. Conclusion: your attitude, your choice. As Keller concludes his practical guide to attitude transformation, he returns to his central message. Your attitude represents your most fundamental choice, one that influences every other aspect of your life experience and achievements. While circumstances, other people, and past experiences can suggest or pressure certain perspectives, the final decision about how you view any situation remains exclusively yours. This freedom brings both responsibility and opportunity. On one hand, we can't legitimately blame external factors for our persistent attitudes. On the other hand, we possess tremendous power to reshape our lives by consciously selecting more constructive viewpoints. This choice, exercised moment by moment through thousands of daily thoughts, words, and actions, ultimately determines the trajectory of our personal and professional lives. Keller acknowledges that attitude transformation isn't a simple or immediate process. Perspectives established over decades through countless repetitions don't change overnight. The journey involves becoming increasingly aware of current patterns, consistently choosing alternative viewpoints, weathering the discomfort of unfamiliar thinking, and patiently practicing new approaches until they become natural. He emphasizes that progress matters more than perfection. Even modest improvements in attitude create significant positive effects, and each constructive choice builds momentum for further growth. The goal isn't flawless positivity, an unrealistic and potentially counterproductive standard, but rather a general orientation toward possibility, appreciation, and responsible agency despite inevitable fluctuations. Perhaps most importantly, Keller reminds readers that attitude selection ultimately determines not just external achievements but internal experience, the quality of our moment-to-moment lives regardless of circumstances. Even while pursuing improved conditions, positive attitudes allow us to appreciate current blessings, find meaning in challenges, and experience genuine connection with others, creating fulfillment throughout the journey rather than postponing it until some future achievement. The book closes with a call to begin immediately, recognizing that attitude transformation happens through consistent small choices rather than dramatic declarations. By selecting one specific area for attention, perhaps self-talk, problem framing, or expression of appreciation, and practicing improved approaches daily, readers can initiate a positive spiral that gradually encompasses their entire orientation toward life. Through this progressive transformation, we discover the profound truth behind the book's title. Attitude truly is everything, not because circumstances don't matter, but because our perspective determines how we interpret, respond to, and ultimately transform those circumstances. By choosing constructive attitudes, we essentially choose the quality of our lives regardless of external conditions. If you found this summary valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more life-changing book insights. Leave a comment sharing which attitude principle resonated most strongly with you or how you plan to implement these ideas in your daily life. Your engagement helps our community grow and allows us to continue bringing you high-quality content. Remember, the most powerful choice you'll make today isn't what you'll do, but how you'll think about what you do. Thank you for watching.